So you want to learn how to do watercolor. Well, you're in luck today because I'm going to give you the quick and dirty method to get in there and get started right away. First off, I'm going to tell you the supplies you need, the techniques that you can use, and just a few tips and tricks to make this beginning of your journey easier and more fun. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is supplies, and of those supplies, I'm going to talk about paper first. So you need watercolor paper for watercoloring. You don't want copy paper, you don't want manila paper, you don't want construction paper, you want paper specifically made for watercolor. And it comes in two grades. We have student grade and we have professional grade, and I'm just going to show you a few of these. So one of the big differences between student grade paper and professional grade paper is what it's made from. You can see this is Arches. It's one of the best, in my opinion, watercolor papers out there, and it is made from 100% cotton. And if a paper does not have on it that it is made from 100% cotton, then it has usually got rag or wood pulp in it, some type of filler, and it's not going to behave the way that really good watercolor paper behaves. Student grade paper does have its uses. You can practice brush strokes on it. You can just try out different ideas, different techniques. It's just not going to be as good as the good stuff, of course, because you do get, bluntly, what you pay for. So I have Canson and I have Arteza, and I'll link these things below if you want to try some of the student grade paper. So that's all I'm going to do with this for now. I just wanted to give you that. So really good watercolor paper that I use is Arches, and watercolor has three different kinds. We have rough, hot pressed, and we have cold pressed paper. And it's all about the tooth of the paper, the texture of the paper. So with the rough paper, it's going to have more texture, and I'm not really going to say a whole lot about that today. That can be for another video. And the hot pressed paper is extremely smooth, less tooth, just a smooth paper. I personally do not use hot press very often. And honestly, I use it, but I use it for mixed media, not watercolor. The one that I use and the one I prefer, and the one that we're going to use today and talk about more today, is Arches cold press paper. I love this paper. You can see it's 100% cotton, 140-pound paper. And this one comes in a binded pad. And what you do is you use like a bone cutter. Bone cutter? What is this thing called? I don't remember. Anyway, you use this tool and you just, and I'm not going to do it fully because I want it stuck to this pad. You go around and you just release it from the adhesive that's around it. I like this because you don't have to tape your paper down when you use it. So that's the paper. I'm not going to say much more about that. This is what we'll use today for some demonstration purposes. But moving on, your next supply that you need is paint. So watercolor paint comes in palettes. This is a little Winsor Newton travel palette. And the good thing about palettes is that they have a lot of the colors. So you're not too worried about color mixing at this point. When you're beginning painting, the last thing you want to have to worry about is mixing up your colors. Unless you really like that, and maybe you're not new to painting in general. Maybe you've done acrylics or gouache or something. The other one are the tubes. I love the tubes. And what I do is I just usually put them on a palette, a ceramic palette, which is preferable to like a plastic palette. The watercolors bead up on a plastic palette. And paint, like paper, comes in student grade and artist grade. The artist grade paints are going to be better than your student grade, but it doesn't seem to matter as much. It doesn't matter as much as it does with the paper, but it's still, you'll be able to tell a difference as you move up to artist grade paints. Okay, so we've got paper, we've got paints. The next thing we are going to use is brushes. These are round brushes, and that is a really good place to start when you are starting watercolor, is a round brush. You'll see that the tips are rounded when they're wet like that, and they come in different sizes. I have a 10, a 12, and a 6, and I generally use a 4 as well. I have a lot of these. These are some of my favorites though. All the things I share with you today are going to be linked below in the description. So this is Simply Simmons, very budget friendly. These are Princeton Snaps, again, very budget friendly, but I actually really do like these brushes. The quality of the brushes is, for my uses, not as important as, say, with the paper. If you're gonna spend money, more money on one of the supplies, definitely spend it on the paper. That seems to make the most difference with watercolor. So really quickly, I just want to show you a few things that you can do, a few techniques that you can use with the watercolor. And I'm going to use this Arches just like it is right here. So I'm going to grab a couple of my brushes. Definitely need some water. I use 2 jars of water. You'll see, this one you can tell has a lot more paint on it. And I generally try to keep at least 1 jar that has some clean water. It's easier to add clean water when you're using watercolor paints, to add clean water to your watercolors. And also another thing that comes in really handy is a spray bottle that you can activate. You want to activate your watercolor paints when they are completely dry. These are already wet, but you want to activate them, let them set for a couple of minutes so that they are usable. Same thing goes for this. If these have been sitting here for a while, I'm going to spray them and activate them. These are pretty fresh though. Something else that's really useful when you're doing watercolor is something to dry your paintbrush on. Okay, for this section of the video, we're going to talk about a watercolor wash. And I'm going to use this porcelain plate to show you that. And I'm actually going to grab one of my tube paints. Porcelain plates are really great for a palette if you have some at home. It usually works better if you have a limited color palette that you're using. I'm going to throw that there. And so for a wash is just a layer of paint on your paper. And I'm going to add some water to this. I want to get it just the color I want. There are different levels of watercolor. What am I trying to say here? Different levels of color. You have from very pigmented to almost no pigment. And again, that is something for later. But just remember that when you're doing watercolor, the water is your medium. That is what you're working with, and you're adding color to that medium. So the more water you add to the paint, the more diluted the color is. The less water you add, the more intense your color is. So I just want to make a good puddle of pretty intense wash, about probably a level 3. I'm going to make more than I think I need. To cover my spot. Let's see. I still have a big glob of paint there, but... And then I'm going to test this. I'll always have some testing paper just to kind of see where the color is at, if it's where I want it to be. Set that over there. Okay, so I am actually going to use my spray bottle just for a little more color there. Put that in there really good. Okay. That may be enough. Hopefully it is. Okay, so I'm going to tilt my paper just a little bit. I'm going to load up my brush with the pigment, and I'm going to start with a bead of paint just coming across and letting gravity do some of the work. Now, I will say something about brushes while I'm doing this. A really good brush is going to hold more pigment, more water. Sorry, it's going to hold more water. Your water holds the pigment. But we're just going to drag this across. If we're trying to get an even wash, you want to just pull that bead across the paper. And as it's, like I said, we're using gravity, about a 45-degree angle here, to pull that across. But a good paintbrush is going to hold more of the water, so you'll be dipping into your paint less often. As you can see, I'll zoom in here. When I come across that little paint bead there across the paper, it pulls the paint from the top. You can see right there. If I'm making contact with it, it'll pull it down the paper. And all the way down here, I kind of missed some spots. mostly because I don't have my glasses on. So I'm going to come down and just pick up any extra paint that's here. That'll even that bottom part out. Okay, so now we're going to do a gradient, and I'm going to use the blue that I just mixed up. I'm going to turn my paper this way. Okay, so basically it's going to be just like you did over here. You're going to have a puddle of paint that you've mixed up with water. Get it where you want it. Load your brush up really good. I'm going to tilt my paper, and I'm just going to drag it across. I don't know what that little spot is right there. That's weird. Okay, anyway. Take that bead across. Load my brush up. Come across. And when I get down to around a quarter to a half of the, a third to a half of the way down, I'm going to start adding fresh water, clean water, to my brush, to my paint. I'm just going to add a little water into that and bring that down. So when we get toward the bottom, I'm going to pull out quite a bit of this water. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up any extra paint along there, and then we have a gradient. Okay, so the next tip I want to talk about is wet on wet. So I went and changed my water out. I have some nice clean water in my clean water jar. And I'm going to make sure that my brush is good and clean. I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to add a good glossy layer of water. Evidently I missed a little bit of paint. That's okay. Just going to get some good paint on there. Wet on wet is one of my favorite techniques to use. And I'm using it just for demonstration here, but you can really use it in if you're painting. I paint a lot of flowers, so I use it while I'm painting flowers a lot, and you can see kind of the glossiness of it. Oops, touched paint. Oh well, it happens. So I'm going to get a really good amount of paint on my brush, and I'm just going to come over here and with the tip of it just touch and just watch that paint spread out. Okay, so you can see how that is spreading out. And now I'm going to come over here and get some of the magenta and really load my brush up. And I'm just going to come in next to the blue and drop some color in. And you can see how there's some color mixing going on where the blue and the magenta have touched. This ultramarine and the magenta, you have a purple. I love doing this because it's really unpredictable in a predictable manner, if that makes sense. So you could literally do some very abstract flowers using this technique. Just coming through with a stem, some leaves, have some really pretty mixes of color there. It's just fun to watch and see what it does as it dries as well. Technique I want to talk about today is glazing, and for that I'm going to just use my paint that I've been using. I'm going to use some magenta, and I'm going to make a circle. Now for glazing, we let the layers dry in between. So I'm going to let that dry. Now to speed up the process, I'm going to use a heat gun. You can also use a hair dryer. You can see how watercolor lightens up as it dries. That's something to keep in mind as you're painting. You can always go back through if it's too light and go and darken that up. But for glazing, I'm actually going to come through with a yellow circle now. And I want them to overlap just a little bit. And you can see how glazing works. We actually have the two separate colors in the middle because we have the pink and the yellow. We have an orangey, peachy color. Okay, now I am going to grab some blue. And again, I'm going to overlap the circles. Need to get that just a little bit lighter. And again with the heat gun. So you can see how we have the colors come together. We have our purple and our green and our orange. So these are our primary colors, the magenta, the yellow, and the blue. And then we have the secondary colors with the orange, the purple, and the green. So glazing is a great technique to use when you're wanting to blend colors on your paper, also to give some shading and different color values because the colors still come through, and it's just a beautiful technique to know. So just a note about watercolor. It's like anything else. When you first start learning something, you really have to get down to the nitty-gritty and learn the techniques that, the have-tos and all that. Kind of like when you were a little kid and you were learning how to form your letters. And then eventually you had your own handwriting. That was you. People can see your handwriting and know that it's you. So that's kind of how watercolor is going to work if you continue it. You're going to learn these techniques, and as you go, they're going to morph, and your style is going to show through. I can show my children a painting, not tell them it's mine, but they instantly know it's mine just by the style that comes through. So don't get too bogged down in the minutia of techniques, and just keep working at it. As you could see, my gradient was not that great, and I very seldom use gradients. So it's just one of those things that you just practice. And that's what you can use that student grade paper for, is to practice. But yeah, I really do enjoy watercolor. And it's funny because I use it in a different way. I use it in a very opaque fashion instead of the more translucent light fashion that you see it used a lot. If you enjoy the video, please give it a like, and let me know if you want to see an advanced watercolor technique video. I will probably break it down even more, just because even putting all this together in one video seemed like a lot. There's multiple things, advanced techniques out there that can make watercolor even more fun. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for stopping by. Bye-bye.